Good evening. It's good to have everyone here tonight. We've got a good crowd, and it's always my pleasure to be back in front of you on every other Thursday, and I think we're going to try to keep it going the rest of the summer. I would announce that instead of meeting at, we've been coming in at 6 o'clock and having some refreshments and stuff during the summer. We're just going to come in at 6:30 without coming in ahead of time. So we'll open tonight with a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, we are so very thankful for the glorious spring weather that you've brought to us. It is so great, Lord, to see you renew the earth here in Indiana in the spring with all the greenery and the plants and our ability to get out and participate in the great nature that you've given us for sustainment. Lord, we ask that you will keep our eyes and ears open to the things that are happening around us and give us understanding. And may we look to you for guidance through all things that are coming before us. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. With that in mind, I'd like to start out tonight reading from Ephesians, be chapter 1, verse 17. And I think it's real appropriate to what we're trying to do here on Thursday nights. And it says in the NLT version I'm reading from tonight, this is Paul talking to the Ephesians. He was asking for spiritual wisdom for them. And he says, asking God, the glorious Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, to give you spiritual wisdom and insight so that you might grow in your knowledge of God. And this is kind of a carry-on from what Bishop was talking about last week, not this week, that it's time that we engage more spiritually versus with physical things. And that is so very true. And what this is doing here, this verse in Ephesians, Paul's not asking for spiritual wisdom and insight to be a prophet or to talk about what's going on. He's just talking about, do you need to work hard to understand so that you have a better understanding of God himself? That's the key, is having an understanding of what God is, what he wants. And the only way to do that's through the guidebook, okay? And if you're not using a guidebook, you're missing the whole thing. You can't get everything off the internet. You can't get everything from sitting in a church or a meeting, listening to someone talk. You've got to get into the manual. And our survival manual is the Bible, both Old and New Testament. We don't go along with this new progressivism that the Old Testament's not pertinent anymore. Anyone that says that has absolutely no understanding of the Bible to begin with, and that's very provable. We'll jump right into it tonight. In the Mideast, I don't know if you've been following it. Today's a big day in Israel. They have several holidays that are close together. Of course, they have the holiday of their creation 75 years ago, which was just a few days ago. Today, May 18th, is the day that they call Jerusalem Day. And it's celebrating the day in 1967 in the Six-Day War when they took over Old Jerusalem again. Before that time, even though that they were there in that territory, they did not control Jerusalem. In 1967, the Six-Day War, when they pushed the borders back to where they are today, they took control of Jerusalem, and they celebrate that today. I really expected, I've checked several times, there was quite a bit of violence last night, I say quite a bit. Basically, Israel is experiencing terrorism, violence every day. It's really picked up. We talked about this a few weeks ago, that how it was going to become more frequent, and it has. This last go around, they fired over 1,400 rockets out of Gaza into Israel. Their defense system, which consists of the Iron Dome and a new one that's called David Sling, is a newer version of a interception defense they have, took down almost all of them, but some of them got through. And it was all back over this thing about them. They had that 2 weeks ago. We talked about that one guy that died on a hunger strike, a Palestinian that was in Israeli prison. And they used that as an excuse. They used an excuse that during Ramadan that the police came in on the Temple Mount and was arresting Palestinians. And anything they can see as a reason to stir up some stuff, they're doing it. Probably two things going on here. One is, of course, Iran's behind almost all this. And I'm not, I've read one article that pointed out that maybe Iran is testing Israel's defense system. And that's a very real possibility, because now they know that Israel's not all that it has been up to this point. Always been 100% they could take down the missiles. And remember, they either take them down, they take a missile out that's incoming if it's going to hit something that would damage property or human lives especially. But this last time, it didn't work 100%. A couple of rockets got through. There's been several people killed, and there's been damage done. Due to that, some of the residents in Israel now are really on the government's back saying, you guys aren't doing enough in retaliation. But they really sent a pretty good message this time when IDF retaliated after the rockets were starting to be launched. They took out 6 of the very top terrorist leaders. And it points out, and I watched Netanyahu give a little speech, and he said, basically what he said, I can't give you an exact quote, but it was this, that, hey, this is a message to you guys that we know where your leaders are, and we can take them out whenever we want to. That was basically what he was saying. And they proved that this last go-around. They evidently, the one thing that Israel's had that's been superb above all else, anywhere else, is their intelligence system, and especially the Mossad. And that is really their key to surviving at this point in time, is knowing what the enemy is, where the enemy is, what the enemy's doing, and being able to stay ahead of the ball game. But that one of these days, whenever this Ezekiel war does break out, that's going to fall apart for a while, because Israel's going to be on its knees at some time in the future. We know that. There's been 77 injured and 2 have been killed. The terrorist leaders, they killed them. This taking back Jerusalem 56 years ago was quite a feat at that time, and very, very important. So today's the last holiday for a while that they have. I can't remember when the next national holiday is, but it's off for a while. So that I really thought Palestinians might kind of rise up today, and the terrorists caused some problems as far as more rockets or something, but it didn't happen. So maybe they're sitting back licking their wounds, or maybe they learned what they wanted to learn by this last rocket attack, and they're sitting back evaluating. Don't know. We'll know in the future. The other thing that's going on over there in that part of the world, Iran took another oil tanker. That's the 3rd. I'm really surprised that there's not more of this in the news, because this has some serious consequences for the world in general, not just the United States, but everybody that's depending on petroleum being shipped. I don't know. It's just I can't believe they're letting them get away with it. And I'm not talking about the United States by themselves. I'm talking about the world commerce in general, letting them get away with it. But they did. Another major happening that was over there was another Iranian, Russian, and Turkey meeting. Those are the big 3 in that area. And a lot of people say, well, why is Turkey so important? They sit over on the east end of the Mediterranean, and they throw a lot of weight. The big thing that's going on in Turkey right now, too, is they had their presidential election. And the current president, Erdogan, did not win outright, which was a little surprising. He's been basically in charge for the last 12 years. He had a they did a lot of good. He did a lot of good things going. He, of course, remember now, he was trying to create a Muslim caliphate. He thinks Turkey should be a Muslim caliphate. And he did a lot to build more mosques and doing everything he can to promote that, trying to become more of a leader in the Arab world. And he succeeded in a lot of ways, but this last year and a half or so, there's been some very severe economic problems in Turkey. Inflation's really bad. They've had some downturns in several areas. So he didn't win outright. In Turkey, the president has to outright win 50% or more. If they have no one hits that 50% mark, they have a runoff between the two top contenders. So I think that's May 28th, if I think that's correct. They will have their next election between the two top guys. They still think Erdogan's going to win. There was some claims of election fraud, et cetera. Of course, that's true anywhere there's election in the world now, there's election fraud. But evidently there wasn't too much because he didn't win. He got 49 point something, real close to 50% the winning mark. So evidently he didn't have control over a whole lot. But why is Turkey so important? You stop and think about this. Turkey sets, you've got Turkey controls the Bosphorus Straits. And if you look on a map, the Bosphorus Straits is off the southwest end of the Black Sea. So for all this Ukrainian grain and stuff we're talking about, and a lot of the oil exports and stuff, comes down through the Black Sea, has to go through the Bosphorus Straits into they call it Lake Marmara. It's kind of it's a huge lake. It's got salty water in it. You go through Marmara, and then you come on down, and then you slip out into the Adriatic Ocean, or the Aegean Sea that's in the Mediterranean. So it's a major trade route. The Bosphorus Strait's really narrow. I think the narrowest spot is like 2,400 feet or something like that. It's narrow. And so Turkey controls that. Turkey were to shut that down, it would have some very major implications for Europe, especially on the food end. Now, talking about that, they also border, you got to remember, Turkey's a large country for Europe. They border Syria, they border Iraq, and they border Iran. And so it's that Turkey-Russian relationship is extremely important. And as we look at Ezekiel 38, 39, the Gog-Magog war, Turkey's a major player in that with Russia. So that's why we talk a lot about Turkey. The other thing is the Revelation tells us that the Antichrist will arise out of the ancient or out of the Roman Empire. Well, there's very likely, or a lot of people think, that that's in reference to the fact that he could come out of Western Turkey, because Western Turkey was a major part of the Roman Empire. So you could see that. That's why some people think that the Antichrist is going to be a Muslim. You know, we don't know, but it's potential. We do know there's a potential Antichrist walking the earth all the time. There's probably several of them right now. And because we've mentioned here before, Satan doesn't know the time or the place that God's going to flip the switch. So he has to have a Antichrist in position at all times, a potential Antichrist in position at all the times for that person to step forward. It's not going to be, he's not going to wait and somebody's going to get birthed, I don't think, and grow up to be the Antichrist. That's not the way it's going to happen. He's going to make himself reveal because he's already a world leader. It's just that this time Satan will be able to take control of that situation and make him in charge of the world. So keep that in mind. We're up in that area to talk about Europe. The Ukrainian war, I don't know how long fighting's go on, but the war per se, I think, is, regardless of what you're hearing on major media and from the United States, it's pretty much over. Bakhmut, the Russians I'll show you what the Russians are doing. I can draw it easier. They lost 1,600, Ukrainians lost 1,600 people in the last couple of days. And here's what's happening. You've got this line going down through a battle line all the way through Ukraine. And let's say this is Bakhmut. Okay, Bakhmut was kind of setting back like a city. It kind of sets like this. And this was all on the eastern side was all the industry and everything. And that's where they've been battling for all these months. You keep hearing them talk about Bakhmut. And Bakhmut's not really strategically important to the whole thing, but it's become kind of a poster child that whoever takes it's top dog. And Russia's been gradually taking this over to the point now they basically control all of Bakhmut except a little residential area on this north side, and there's a little bit of a commerce area down here. But Ukraine keeps trying to show that they can launch an offensive against this, and here's what they do. They've been trying to pick a spot where they think the Russian defense is maybe weak. And what Russia will pull their troops back a little ways. And the Ukrainians are coming in thinking they're moving the Russians back. And then the other thing is, you've heard us talk about that here before. This is hilly countryside, more or less. This is plains, if you can think of big flat farmland and stuff. Well, this thing, the Dnieper River, it runs down through here, kind of divides these two. Well, what Russia's been doing, they did a big job there just a couple of days ago. They let the Ukrainians come in, and then they just flank them on both sides, and then they destroy them with artillery after they've got them flanked. They killed 1,600 people. Hey, you had major World War II battles that didn't lose 1,600 people in one battle. That's a big deal. And the thing is, Ukrainians are still Zelensky, he's still trying to get everybody to ship him arms. Ship him arms, ship me money, ship me arms, ship me money. And that's all that's going on. But from everything I can see from the news feeds that I look at, that I have some faith in, Russia's got it. And we knew that all along. We said that all along. Russia's going to win this thing. Russia's not losing hardly any troops in this stuff. Very few casualties. So they killed 1,600. I don't know how many were wounded. There'd be a lot of wounded went along with that 1,600 death. So it's not good for Ukrainians. The UK has sent, here again, the NATO is still poking that Russian dog with a stick. UK Brits are sending them long-range cruise missiles. And of course, Zelensky is saying, we will not use this into Russia proper. We'll just use it here in Ukraine. Well, yeah. So you can believe that. Other big things that's happening, I was still talking about Ukraine. If you remember, Ukraine, of course, Ukraine is one of the largest grain producers in the world. They produce a tremendous amount of food, especially to Africa, northern Africa. Almost all the grain and everything that they get, flour, the wheat to make flour and everything, comes out of Ukraine. Well, when the Ukraine war started in February a year ago, that disrupted everything. And, we talked about, and you go to Lebanon, Lebanon would be a good example. Those people, they don't have bread. Didn't have. I mean, they had to adjust for it. Well, there was all this grain sitting in the Ukraine. So they had to make Turkey, here again, you see Turkey-Russian influence. Turkey brokered a deal between the Ukraine and Russia to ship that grain out through the Black Sea, through the Bosphorus Straits, into North Africa, in the Mediterranean around. That's the way it's shipped. Well, that deal ran out 2 days ago. Russia agreed up to a certain date. Well, Russia extended it for 2 months. But the interesting thing is, and I was telling someone over lunch today, we were talking about it, that in Successful Farming this week, I picked up on a headline that said, Ukrainian grain deal isn't hurting the market. And I thought, why? It should be, because they're dumping all this grain out. Well, stop and think. And I've not read this anywhere yet. I'm going to have to research a little bit more. I just come up with this morning. When the war started, if you think of Ukraine over there in that part of the region where they raise all the crops, it's just like here. You go to like Falmouth Elevator, big bins, big storage bins. Farmers have storage bins. When you look at that when you look at them over there, you'll see John Deere equipment, big equipment, everything just like here. Well, what happens if there's not someone there taking care of that grain in these bins? And by that, a lot of people probably don't realize, it takes a lot of time and effort to maintain your grain quality in these bins. Any of you ever been in a building to where you have a weather change and all of a sudden the cement's all wet, or you got water dripping off the ceiling inside a building? Those grain bins do the same thing. And if there's not someone there monitoring them, and if they need to add dry air or whatever, or just blow air through the thing, that grain's going to spoil, and it spoils really quick. Well, come to find out, and I was researching this a little bit, that's the reason the grain that's coming out of Ukraine right now is no good. It's not all of it, but a lot of it's spoiled. So you can't use it for human consumption. So that's a big deal. And I think we're going to hear more of that. And the reason it's a big deal is because it further enhances the shortage of food we have in certain parts of the world, especially Africa, North Africa. And that's going to get worse. China bought into the Hamburg port, Hamburg, Germany. That's a major deal. I think they bought 26 or 29% interest into that port. That's another major port in the world that China's got their fingers into. They just keep going. We've talked about that before in here, the ports that they're either building or they own part of, just like the same thing they did through the Panama Canal down there. So that was a big deal. Talking about China, this was really interesting. I was watching this last week, and I was watching videos of them ripping out vineyards, orchards, trees that have been planted for conservation purposes, nut trees, nut groves and stuff. They're ripping them out. Government doesn't own them. Okay, they're owned by the individuals. But what they're doing, they're coming into like a vineyard, and I watched the videos of them ripping it out. They're ripping the vineyards out and telling that person that owns that, you will grow grain. You're going to grow wheat, corn, soybeans, or rice. They're doing this all across the country. Question is why? There's maybe two reasons. One of them, we talked to some folks today that we have a China connection with. They are either preparing for war, which we know they are. They're preparing for famine, because instead of eating grapes for a short period of time, that same ground can grow a heck of a lot more grain and feed more people, of course. You have grapes, you can always ship them. They're perishable grain. You can grow the grain and store it till you need it. The other thing that goes along with that, China's purchase of grain on the world market has been they've far surpassed anything they've ever done before this last year. Their grain purchases are extremely high. It's one reason our corn and soybean prices here at home have been good all year for the farmers, which is a good thing here. But their purchases are very high. But yeah, they're ripping these things out. And the farmer has no choice. They're telling him, you will grow grain.
This is in China.
In China, yeah. And it's not just in one place. They have, the other thing they've done to prepare for this, I read, and this was an article, I just thought of it, I read a couple weeks ago about they've created a new, like an ag advisor that would go out in, and he'd have a certain region. It'd be like an extension office here, but this guy's a government employee. This guy, of course, a lot more clout than an extension agent or something. But his whole sole purpose is to go out and enhance food production in his region. That it was a new office they've created, that the government's created. So there's a lot going on there. We evidently, what's his name? Buffett, the big investor.
Warren.
Yeah, Warren Buffett. I couldn't spit his name out at first. He has sold all of his stock in the large, which is the largest chip maker in the world, which is in Taiwan. He has been selling a little bit of his stock. He dumped it all. So you start putting all these pieces together. We know that China has, like I said, there's not been any big major flare-ups recently, but they keep the pressure on. They're doing several things. They're pressuring other countries around the world to not recognize Taiwan. They've had some success doing that. They are constantly pushing Taiwan with military action. They're flying missions. They've got their ships around, and they're constantly testing Taiwan's defenses. We've talked about that in here. They've flown large groups of airplanes into what's called the ATIS, the defensive zone that each country has, the offshore. They've been penetrating those. They do that almost on a daily basis and just continually doing it. The other thing is they are pressuring Taiwanese, the people in Taiwan, especially some of the influentials, the business people and everything. You need to start listening to us and prepare to work with us because you're going to. Basic things. So they're putting the pressure on every place they can apply pressure on Taiwan. They are, and so it's just a matter of time before they either physically take it or Taiwan capitulates and comes under communist rule. The name of that company was TSM. Is the company in Taiwan. That's the largest ship company in the world. Here's something that's interesting. Well, the other thing is we talked to some folks today with Chinese connections. Their families telling them things are not good in China. We know that jobs are becoming more scarce. The reason is production worldwide is down. And and here again, I was going to talk about this in another section, but we've talked about potential for recession and bad economic times here. We've even got major economic people now not saying if we have a recession, they're saying when. That's changed over the last couple of weeks. The bank thing, I'll still say, is not done. There's still more to come on that. The total economic situation is that the recession, when it occurs, is not just going to be a United States recession, it's going to be worldwide. You look up the inflation rate in Europe. I don't think there's a country in Europe that's less than 10%, and a lot of them is 15 to 20. You can't sustain that. See how bad we are here now with just a measly 5-6% interest or inflation rate that they claim or whatever, 7% of them. It's double that. But just look at your prices in your grocery stores and stuff. It's out of, I feel sorry for the folks that's got 3 or 4 kids at home and trying to feed them. I mean, you go in a grocery store, it's ugly. I really think it is. There's buys on a few things like, chicken right now. You can get some good buys on chicken and stuff, but Go look at the other stuff. A bag of chips has doubled. You can't already buy a bag of chips for less than $5 or $6 now. It's amazing. So those things are going to get worse. Excuse me. The bad thing is that folks were telling us that China is on the verge of economic problems too. If and when the recession hits, countries like China, some of these countries in Europe that's already, Turkey's a good example. Their inflation rate's terrible, has been terrible. Lebanon, you look at Argentina, you go clear around the world, you've got a bunch of countries that are on the verge of having serious economic problems. If and when the recession does hit, especially if it hits here, you're going to see that multiply all around the world, and you're going to see gross economic problems completely around the world. It doesn't look like anybody's going to be immune to it from what I read. The other thing that was interesting on China, and the thing that we're reading, the people I talked with today verified everything I've been reading. That what I think I know about China is that it's happening. Here's the other thing. Remember China had the one-child policy for years? I think that went on for 20 years, 15 or 20 years? A whole generation anyhow. Now they're paying people to have children, but here's the kicker. It was too little too late because they are forecasting that by 2050, China will lose 1/2 of their population. Now stop and think about that number. Half their population. The other thing is India has had the similar problems, and they've been trying to restrict births. Sometime in between now and 2050, they estimate there will be 200 million men in the Asian India area that has no wife and has no prospects of having one. Because when they did this one-child thing, if you had a girl, you killed it. You kept the boy. And if you had 2 or 3 girls, you kept killing girls until you got a boy to keep that one child. That's what they did. And so now we've got this huge mass, 200 million young men that's going to be here in the next decade to 2 that have no chance of having a woman. So you get thinking about something. And then Heather brought up that, and this one article I had been reading alluded to it too, but she thought the same thing. She says, isn't that 200 million the same number we've got in the army in Revelations? And it is. That's what it says in Revelations. There'd be a 200-man army. So like she was saying, well, if you can't have a wife and have babies, you might as well go to war. So, and there may,
You said that so much nicer than I said it.
I know. I'm trying to protect you.
I appreciate that. I love you.
Okay, let's jump over to some things here at home, because there's one area I want to talk a little bit in depth at. The devil at work, we'll get to in a minute, but here at home quickly, this illegal immigration thing is totally out of control. Do you realize 1/2 of all the hotel, motel rooms in New York City has immigrants in it? Even to the point, people that have had reservations for months are having their reservations canceled because they're moving immigrants into the room. And this is all right now in New York, at New York City's expense. Yeah, that's not going to last long. There are schools that they are putting putting immigrants in their gyms and cafeterias and denying the kids use. They're housing these people in schools. It's just amazing. I came up with a figure. They looked at it in this April that we just got through versus 2 years ago, 2022, 87 times more immigrants come in the country this April than 2 years ago in April. 87-fold increase. And it's just the one thing that's interesting, you're seeing now, they just let this stuff go so long, but they're calling to bring impeachment proceedings against Mayorkas for his failure, which is too late. They've already done the damage. Here at home, they're claiming 200 mass shootings so far this year. Okay, there's actually 19, all right? But the media is saying there's 200. And you hear it in Congress, they're going, we've had 200 mass shootings this year, so far this year. No, you've had 19. Now, I admit 19 is way too many. But it's a sign of the mental illness that we're seeing in this country. And I feel that it's and have for some time. It's just a byproduct or a product of what the close down in COVID. We created this mess. We enhanced the mental problems that these young folks are having. And not all of them's young, 35, 40 years old. But we enhanced that through the lockdown. We've created the environment that we're now dealing. You reap what you sow, and that's where we're at. There is a definition of mass shootings. I think has to be 4 or more involved, and there had to be 1 death or something like that for it to be called a mass shooting. That's always been the standard, but they're blowing it all out of the water. The Senate is now, they're bringing a bill up to load up the Supreme Court. They want to add 4 justices. And of course, if they do, they get that. If this thing gets passed through, it would allow Biden to appoint 4 Supreme Court justices. We'd have 13 instead of 9. So that's back on the burner. This was you just can't read the Supreme Court we've got. And here again, it's just stuff that makes no sense at all when you look through it. But this is something going to raise your food cost. And if Pastor's not here tonight, but if he happens to watch this, he'll be really involved. Your price of bacon is going to go up. Here's what happened. In California passed a law saying that a hog, a sow, has to have so many square feet to be able to move around and exercise, okay? And I think the industry standard right now is 14 feet, if I remember right, which everybody lives by. And actually, as someone that came out of that environment, in fact, I helped putting some of these large CAFOs together back in the 1980s. We worked on some of the first ones. There at the beginning, they had, especially some of these gestating sows, they had very minimal way to move. They migrated away from that, and they have more room. Same thing with chickens. Most chickens today have far more room than they had 15 years ago. The agricultural community has recognized that, we went too far one way, and they've come back. Well, California passed this rule that they want them to add, I think it's 10 square feet. I think it's either 24 or 27 square feet for a sow. Or you can't sell the meat in California. Now, here's the thing. California doesn't produce hardly any pork. It just doesn't happen. But they consume 13% of all the pork in the United States. So with those figures in mind, that means a farmer in Iowa that pork ends up in California has a problem. He's got to meet their standards or he can't sell his meat in California. That's a huge hunk of market. You talk about 13%. Well, so they got sued. California got sued. The pork producers, they sued California and said they're interfering with interstate commerce. Supreme Court upheld California. So now these farmers are going to have to, if they're going to sell meat in California, they're going to have to redesign buildings. These kind of things are going to continue to come. It's just more and more government controls what it amounts to. And that's what you're faced with. So it will raise food costs if this thing plays out. One good news, I think Montana, the first state in the union to ban TikTok. So that's a plus, yeah. The other thing here at home, and I didn't write it down. I didn't get everything written down, I guess. Let's see. I'll wait and talk about that here in a minute. It's very obvious that with what's going on, there was another Supreme Court ruling on holding internet providers liable for some of the stuff that's on there, like Twitter, Google, and them. Supreme Court turned that down. They're not liable. They got free reign to post whatever they want. But here's the thing, and that you can look at that two ways, and just what struck my mind with everything that's going on. Our freedom of speech covers speech. It stops when you get involved with electronics and internet. You do not have free speech on the internet. Okay? It's obvious. There's certain things I could say here tonight that would immediately kick this little blip that we do off of YouTube. So it just thinking about that is how it's changing from our freedom of speech doesn't mean everything that maybe we think it should. And it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out. This SCOTUS ruling was one of them. Okay, let's talk about the devil at work, and that's part of it. Government being able to keep our free speech. I've got a list of things here to talk a little bit about. Interesting, I want to talk about AI tonight. Before I get there, we'll leave that for the last. Did you know you can go to jail in the UK, in Britain now, for creating social anxiety? Watched it. I watched 2 cops come up and arrest a woman at her home for creating, and that was out of his mouth. She says, "Why am I being arrested?" And he told her, "You're creating anxiety." Somebody had filed a complaint. She got arrested. You're talking about George Orwell's 1984. I mean, man, we're living it. Did you know that kids can get online and order a queer kit? Yeah. And queer kit is a guide to how to become homosexual. All right. The other thing, did you see this? You can order a transgender development kit, and they will send you booklets on how to do it. They will send you straps to strap yourself down to hide your gender. Yeah, stuff's available. Coming out of Florida, some company in Florida, you can order this stuff. And it's just on top of it's called Transsexual Self-Development Kit is what it's called. Do it at home, do it yourself. Yeah, just amazing. I have to laugh at that. Somebody got into my notes. My daughter. They, you didn't see this. I'll show it to you later. Well, almost said it. They are creating non-binary robots in the cartoons now. See, the whole thing about all this is having the ability to condition these kids to this stuff is what they're doing. Yeah, they are now having non-binary robots in cartoons to just indoctrinate these kids further. Another thing I came across, and it all on much that's in the same vein, there was a 4-year-old, this is back to the UK, and the reason I keep referring back to Britain, whatever happens over there eventually gets here. It's kind of like whatever happens here on the east and west coast migrates to the center. That's always been true. The things that happen in Europe, like this kind of stuff, end up here too. There was a 4-year-old boy forced to march in a pride parade by a judge in Britain. Didn't have an option to opt out. They forced that kid, 4-year-old kid now. Parents didn't want him in Pride March. Judge says, yes, you are. Just stop and think about it. A 4-year-old. It's beyond understanding. Something we talked about in here a few weeks ago. In fact, what was her name that read had the paper telling us to talk to call your Yeah. It's what she referred to. We had talked about a couple weeks earlier. The WHO meeting is May 30th, and that's where they will pass this agenda or pass this. It's a treaty. They've got all the details worked out. They'll pass a treaty that any country that signs onto this treaty will give WHO the ability to come in and manage a pandemic, manage your health care during a pandemic. It gives them the ability to declare a pandemic. And I imagine it's going to be so interesting to see. I haven't been able to read the whole text yet. I'll bet you, if you remember back, it's been months ago, I talked about, it was in the Connersville newspaper, the fact that now since we have AI can do a much better job of predicting a pandemic or a health outbreak than man can because it can digest the data so quickly, right? So you're going to have AI predicting a potential pandemic, and I'll bet you $10 that treaty will reference their ability to predict and shut down a place to prevent a pandemic from happening based on AI-generated data. I'll bet you. So it'd be interesting to see. I'll follow up on that. But they're meeting May 30th. Biden's already said he'll sign it. Congress is already working on a bill to prevent it, but I don't know. They can sign all the bills they want to. Sucker's going to veto it, and they still control the Senate. So they're not going to override a veto. It takes 60 votes to override a veto. So it'll be interesting to see. It would take all the Democrats and plus some of the Republicans to override a veto, and that's not going to happen. Okay, let's see. The other thing I had, just as a side note, we talked about how the dollar's becoming less important, or all these countries are working to get away from the dollar. Venezuela, Maduro, their president, just announced that they're not going to use the dollar anymore as their standard. So that's another country. We already have China doing business with Russia, China doing business with Brazil, China doing business with Iran. They're all using Chinese yuan. So the dollar, they're chipping away at the dollar till they finally get it to. And Maduro said one reason they're doing it is because that way the United States can't sanction them. They can't touch their money. And he's right. You know, that's the reason Russia wants rid of it. If, you know, we caused Russia a lot of problems with this Ukraine thing because we were able to apply sanctions to a lot of their businesses and their oligarchs and their people's money. If they're not dealing in dollars, we can't touch it. So that's what's coming. That's one way they're taking the United States down, taking us out of power. Okay, let's talk about AI for a few minutes. Bilderberg, does anyone know what Bilderberg is? Okay, Bilderberg, for those that don't, Bilderberg was started in 1954. It's a meeting of the top political and business people from the United States and Europe. It was originally started, Bilderberg's a hotel in the Netherlands. It was started in 1954 to business and political leaders getting together to help prevent another world war. That was the basis for it. Since that time, it has morphed into more like a world, like a WEF, or what's the other one? I had a brain freeze. That World Economic Forum is WEF, and then there's another group. Anyhow, Bilderberg's similar to that. But it's very, very closed mouth. There's like 100 to 125 to 150 people attend. It's by invitation only. And they talk about the world. They did print their agenda this year. And it's money controlling is what it is. Politics and money getting together to control the world is basically what it's about. The number one thing top on their agenda is AI. And so here's some things I came across this last week talking about artificial intelligence. Number one, you're hearing more and more. Elon Musk was one just this last week saying, we've got some problems here with this stuff. And the guy I mentioned, the guy that worked for Google that developed their AI, he retired. And right after he retired, which I reported 2 weeks ago, he said, man, I'm sorry for my life's work, because he's afraid of what they've created. Just, excuse me. Oppenheimer, and we talked about in the atomic bomb, said the same thing. That they would be damned for what they've created. Well, AI is doing things they don't understand. Now stop and think about that. These are the guys that developed this stuff, and AI is doing things that they in themselves says, we really don't understand how it's doing it. Give you an example. This chat, I don't know where it was, Chat 4 or GPT or which one it was, but one of the chat AIs, they queried it they asked it a question. I can't remember the specific question. It was something about writing a paper about something. Bingo, you get it back. It writes your paper. It references all these materials. Some of the books that it referenced didn't exist. It wrote them. Stop and think about that. No human intervention in this at all.
They're calling it hallucination.
Yeah, hallucinations, that the AI is hallucinating. Yeah. Stop and think about this. Here's the other thing that ought to make you sit up and take notice. Did you know intelligence, the AI intelligence, what it knows, multiplies 2 times. It knows twice as much in 48 hours. Now stop and think about that progression. Every 48 hours, it's doubling what it knows. Yeah, I bet they are starting to say, what have we created? Here's another example. I think it's a math physics problem that it would take a top-level college PhD professor 5 years to figure this problem out, to give you the answer. It took AI 15 minutes.
Oh, minutes. I thought it was seconds. Maybe it's 15 minutes.
I think it was 15 minutes.
It was a breakdown of a protein or something like that.
Yeah, something of that
They said
nature.
that it would take a PhD like 1 billion years.
It was 15 seconds. It wasn't 15 minutes.
To figure out
Yeah.
the answer, or to break down this protein.
Yeah.
1 billion years.
Yeah.
And it did it in
15 seconds. Now, I talked to a guy today. Well, I talked to Chris Gregory today. Chris has ChatGPT on his telephone. He's working on a doctoral, on his second doctoral. He was doing some research, and he asked it to do research on, he said, here's what it was. He says, I need a 2,500 word paper on a particular psychology subject. All right? He had it in 8 seconds. It was on his phone in 8 seconds from the time he asked for it. Stop and think about this. Huh? Oh, man. Yeah.
Did you hear about the New Testament? They asked the AI to summarize the New Testament. In 5 seconds, it gave a summary in 17 words, which I can't find. I kind of tried to look for it.
Yeah.
But Tom Hughes, in fact, I told Heather, maybe Doug can find it.
Well, I'll look it up.
Yeah, okay, but anyway, Tom Hughes said it was very accurate.
Yeah.
Very accurate.
I think I heard
17 words.
I think I heard him talk about that, and I didn't look it up. Yeah. What the question was, in case those at home didn't hear it, AI was given the task to summarize the New Testament. And it did so in how many seconds?
5 seconds.
5 seconds later, it had it. and it was a 17
words.
17 word concise description that was deemed to be accurate. I'll look more into that. But that shows you the power. Here's the thing. It shows you the power that when the Antichrist does step forward, the abilities that now are man-made, the tools, that's the way we need to look at it. The tools for revelation to come about is kind of a way to look at it. One is the cell phone that you're holding in your hand, which I'm told is going to be obsolete here shortly because there's a new system coming. It said that, and it's be out here shortly, that will make the Apple iPhone obsolete, and it's a pair of glasses that you will wear that will do everything your phone will do plus more. We know in Revelations we're told that, like when the two prophets are here, two messengers in Jerusalem, they're going to be killed, they're going to lie, and the whole world is going to watch them rise into heaven. Okay. The phone or the glasses or whatever you have, that's a tool to get it done. AI is a tool that creates the conditions for things like that to happen. The AI, as we're seeing, can make up things and make it appear real. They can take, Jeff was talking, take a picture and make that picture real. They can take Jeff or my face and stick it on. We're seeing lawsuits now where people are suing people because they have taken their image and put it into like a pornographic film or something. I mean, there's lawsuits in court right now. They make them real. The AI has the ability to do that. And now we're getting AI to the point that man's probably not going to control it. It's what some of the claims are, and you're starting to see that. AI can make something false real. We were talking about a minute ago. They asked that AI for a dissertation on a subject, and it made it up. Made up its reference material. Didn't exist, but it sure sounded good, So the reason I'm pointing this out tonight, talking about it, is just another incremental step to getting there, to where Revelation is so doable, even as we sit here right today. The things that Revelation says is going to come about. The swarm of locusts that John describes could be drones. Things that 5-10 years ago we would have never, we'd keep scratching our heads, how can this happen? What could this be? Well, now we're seeing things that could be that. So, talking about worldwide stuff, Eurovision. Anybody familiar with Eurovision? It comes out of Europe. It is a worldwide basic television type thing. It's on the internet, okay? Anyone in the world can access this in real time. Anyone in the world could vote. It was kind of like, I don't know what they were voting on. I think it was some sort of an entertainment thing like Dancing with the Stars or what, that kind of stuff. Anyone could vote. They had 100 million people vote at one time. Stop and think about that. There again, showing you the ability to encompass the whole world at one event at one time. Just, that not been done before, done there. I'll end up with this one. It's called GARM. Has anybody come across GARM? GARM? It's a Global Alliance for Responsible Media. Now, this ties back into we're talking about that we don't have free speech anymore if you're on the internet. Well, GARM has been developed to move advertisers, put it this way, to keep an advertiser off of social media for wrong speak. All right. For example, you saw what happened with Bud Light, with the transgender on the can. Well, you've had some other companies come out trying to make hay with that. Who was it? Who was the other beer company that? It might have been Miller Lite. Miller Lite, didn't they come out with a program? Okay, well, Miller Lite was making fun of it and trying to make hay off of it. Well, this GARM could eliminate Miller Lite being able to advertise that. That's the purpose of this thing. If you've got it, say, if Miller Lite was making fun of the transgenders versus what Bud Light did, then GARM would try to keep these ads off social media. It's an organization. It's a global alliance. It's here again, it's a global thing. That's the point I was trying to look at tonight, was how this AI thing's branching out to where it's just global and structures so many things. Entertainment, advertising, speech is next. So
they interviewed one of the CEO of an AI company, and in this discussion, they were bringing out the point that the AI was asked a question in an obscure language, and within moments,
it learned.
Taught itself this language.
Yeah.
Well, they had no idea that AI
How?
could even do that.
Yeah. That's
just like they don't know how it's coming up with these pretend references.
Yeah, that Marcy brings up a point in case you couldn't hear, was that they gave this AI a question in a foreign language, and this AI had not been trained or exposed to this language. It came up with it. It went and learned the language on its own in a very short period of time and brought the answer that they were asking back in that language. That's the type of things I was talking about at the beginning, is that these researchers are saying AI is doing things they don't understand how it did it. They don't know how this AI did that.
And he asked the CEO, aren't you very hesitant to launch this thing if you don't know how to figure out what it's doing? He says, no, we'll figure it out.
We'll figure it out, yeah. They'll figure it out as they go.
We'll be behind everyone else.
Chris and I was talking, and this is the thing that I mentioned sometime back when these researchers all signed this paper and said we need to have a timeout. And I was talking, it's not going to happen. I mean, it'd be nice, but it's not going to happen. The reason being is this. Just like this guy that got out of Google and said, oh man, I've made terrible mistakes. We shouldn't be doing this. Okay, then give all the money and everything back and give the charities and everything all the money you created and all the money you're still getting in retirement off that because it's such a bad thing. It's not going to happen. Just like a CEO Marcy's talking about, they're afraid of this stuff, but they're making money off of it. And they're not going to quit. They're not backing off of it. Any other questions tonight? That was all I had tonight, and I appreciate everybody's attentiveness and questions and comments. There's a lot going on. The thing of it is, there hadn't been any big blow-ups or anything, but there's just activity everywhere. It's just bang, 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 bang all the time. And then every once in a while, somebody lights a rocket off. But one of these times it's going to be a big rocket instead of some of these small ones, I'm afraid. But it is what it is. We're just, we're watching it unfold. And it's very interesting to watch, really, when you get down to it. It's so interesting to me to watch prophecy happening right before your eyes. I mean, it gives you such a measure of assurance. It's like validation of the Bible. That's the way you should be looking at it. And the reason we're doing these things is to give validation to God through the prophets said this, and by golly, that's exactly what's happening. So it should pump you up and make you feel more confident than ever to go out and talk to others about it. So that's what I would urge you all to do.